let me turn it back to you guys now that we kind of talked it all out in terms of the regulatory regime, but how does that kind of filter into what you guys are doing within the company?
So when I think about our AI governance program, we've iterated, of course. We're on, I think, version 3.0 now, because despite all the very recent press industry attention on generative AI, of course, we've been using AI, machine learning, data scientist team for years. And so let's be frank here, we've certainly been more intentional and pronounced in terms of the creation of policies, procedures. When we were building this and we had our whiteboard, the first thing we wanted to do was create something that was proportionate, not put in 55 toll gates just because maybe that, there's one North Star of the EU AI Act and we want to make sure that we don't miss anything. Is that really the right thing for business? Putting it another way, do we care if someone's using a non-enterprise account to say what is the capital of France? Or do we really want to go after and have better controls around those use cases that are higher risk? And so listening to Andy talk about the EU AI Act, which is very explicit and intentional about what constitutes a high-risk activity, the reality is for a business like ours, it's probably unlikely that we're going to come across a lot of use cases. Yeah. Does that mean we should have no policy? Certainly not. We need to have a policy, we need to have a procedure. But we try, as legal partners here, create not a series of toll gates and barriers, but instead a process where you can get your cross-functional approval for the higher risk and self-defined activities. So I'm going to pick up on what you were saying about training. You've all probably sat through compliance training and you've found ways to click as fast as you can, and they're getting smarter and smarter and they know what we're doing, right? So we had to create something that articulated the risk in the right tone to the right people. So I remember we spent some time saying, whatever we're going to draft, whatever we're going to put together, we need to have a very succinct message to staff. We don't want them thinking, is this high risk or not? It has to be a no-brainer. So we created an acronym. I think we can probably do a better job with this acronym, but it's data risk, where data, D, stands for the demographic, the personal data. Is your generative AI use case with X? And the letters go on and mean other things. The risk is around what you're doing. What's the purpose of the AI? Are we just supplementing a bit of research, or are we building a consumer-facing tool? And so again, are we using recommender systems? Is this going to have an impact on pricing? That's the category that we care about. That's the category that we want the business to be coming to us with. Then we wanted to create an on-brand message to the team, not put 55, the workplace, not put 55 different policies and documents and emails. So we're a travel brand. We launched Ronnie the robot, who was off to Ibiza in the airport, looking for which security lane to go down. You can see how we built on that theme, and there were motifs and metaphors for the internal process. And then what we didn't want to do was create a brand new tool. So imagine if you're having to get your approval from finance, you're having to get your approval from the privacy team, too many approvals. Mm-hmm. We felt that it was incumbent on us to look for existing workflows and build on them. Otherwise, it's an excuse to go rogue, quite frankly. If it's all too difficult, I'll just run my POC and I won't mention and hope for the best. So again, it was looking at existing workflow tools and iterating, as opposed to saying to the business, you now have 7 compliance checks. Yeah. Too much friction. Not when the market's moving so fast, not when we're waking up to disintermediation articles every morning, not when our CEO and leadership team are saying, find your use cases for internal operational efficiency and the consumer facing. So that was key, proportionality. If anyone's in the room in a similar situation, building their V1, their 2.0, it's go after those use cases that really matter for your business. It's going to look very different for each organization. And then just kind of touching on the key milestones in that process. We've spoken about safety. This discussion is around safety. How can you truly be transparent and uphold your principles of safety if you don't know what the vendors and partners are doing? So due diligence. Due diligence is key. Asking the right questions. Recognizing when you're speaking with one of the Gen AI big boys, and they're probably not going to fill in your 25-page questionnaire. We don't have a 25-page questionnaire, but we have a longer form and a shorter form. And again, making sure you're asking the right questions if your opportunity is more narrow to perform that due diligence. Anything else you'd touch on?
Just to say that that is, version 3.0 or whatever. Our first version was, probably more just as everyone started using ChatGPT. We didn't have an enterprise license at that point, and the first thing we did was set out that policy. That policy, 15, 20 pages, it lives on that employee hub.
Yeah.
I don't know how many people have read it, to be honest. I hope they read it, and we did enough training sessions and all of that, but it was really that key second part in version 3.0 where we thought, let's be pragmatic. Let's make everything bite-sized. Let's make a tool, enhance things and processes that we already have.
And if I think about 1.0 and I think about our friends in product and UX, the fact that they'd have to write an email to the compliance team and say, please, may I use that, felt incredibly antiquated. So we started to look at Slack integrations as well. And we have similar kinds of tools where you can say, has this been approved? Am I good to go? One other practical point, and then I'll turn the conversation back to Nikki and Andy, is that, and this was a key learning for us, 1.0, 2.0 was about approved use cases and approved vendors. But we spoke about this, Andy, scope creep is a real risk. You run that POC and you're not using any personal data, but then you find out it's quite decent and you want to use personal data, or maybe you want to try a slightly different use case. Do you really have to go through that whole approval process again? So we, again, felt the responsibility to say, grant as broader approvals as possible, factoring in the information security, the privacy, the due diligence piece, and then have the escalation trigger if you're working outside of that. Otherwise, it's far too narrow. If we're slow, we're going to miss the opportunity.
Just briefly on the escalation trigger, I think that's something that sometimes is forgotten then,
Right.
Because employees use, and wow, this is cool. You do training to avoid this. Any other tips how to create awareness for this?
So there's tone at the top, of course. It's PSAing this more organically. If it's just the compliance and legal team talking about this, it can, candidly be easier to be an afterthought. Where if we have our leadership team embracing it, encouraging us all, running games, hackathons, etc. for this, but also PSAing that key point there, that certainly helps. You spoke about monitoring earlier. I think audit's essential, and I don't see this as any different to a shadow IT issue that we've been probably grappling with as most organisations. And so I think it's an education, trust-based discussion, but then it's also verification through your information security tools.
So I like the concept that you brought up of proportionality. I think especially in an area of, I think governance can span such a spectrum. There's the spectrum of overdoing governance to the point where you have now governance out whatever you're trying to develop and it's never going to hit the market. And then there's not doing enough governance, and now because there was no governance, your product isn't viable on the market, right? So you have to balance that. There's a lot of discussion right now between regulation and innovation as if they are at odds with each other. I don't necessarily see that way. I'm biased, I'm an attorney, so take that with a grain of salt. But I don't see it that way because a lot of times, we get questions about what should we be thinking about. And it's also because governance leads to having a good product. If your product doesn't have a good governance process, when you put it out on market, if it doesn't function the way you have told your investors or your buyers that it's going to function, then it's not going to be considered a viable product. If it is full of, bad quality output, whether it's infringing output, if it's content, if it's misinformation, if it's inaccurate, if it's, enterprise and a company can't rely on it, that means it's not a commercially viable product. So governance is not all about just checking the box of like, okay, here are the 10 things that the law requires. Check, 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 we have done this. But have we done it well enough in a proportional way where we can still meet the speed to market, we can still meet the needs of the business, of the developer, who's putting it out, and the business that's deploying it, while at the same time making sure that this is a long-term solution, right? Because the next thing is that, these products don't get built in a day. I really hope somebody let me know. But these products don't get built in a day. So if we're not thinking about building them with like a long-term plan in place, whatever money you've spent building a product that's not viable, you've spent that money, right? You now have to rebuild something very quickly, and there's probably an investment loss that's there. That's fine. Some of that is the cost of doing business, but again, that should be an informed decision that we're making.